she entered the quiet sanctuary of a church to study. Hours later, her life was stolen in the most brutal way. The world would soon demand justice. This is the story of Uwa Omozuwa, and how one heinous crime gripped Nigeria, and exposed deep flaws in its systems. What happened in that church? Who was responsible, and were they ever held accountable? Stay with me as we uncover every known detail, every twist, and why this story still echoes today. In the early hours of a June morning, within the sanctified walls of a church, a young woman sought solace, quiet, and study. She would never leave alive. Hours turned to days before the world learned of her fate, and what followed sparked national outrage, grief, and the demand for justice. This is the story of Uwa Omozuwa, a 22-year-old Nigerian student whose brutal murder inside a church stunned the nation in 2020. Over the next 30 minutes, we will piece together the known facts, the unanswered questions, the investigation's wounds, and the lasting echoes of her death. We will look at the societal, legal, and institutional cracks her case exposed, and why her name continues to resonate in conversations about violence, gender, and justice in Nigeria. If you are new to the channel, welcome. Please consider subscribing and hitting the bell, so stories like this reach more people. Let us begin. To understand the tragedy of Uwa's death, we must first know who she was. Uwa Omozuwa, fondly called Uwa by friends and family, was born to a family grounded in Christian faith and hard work. She grew up in a loving household, known by those closest to her as bright, diligent, soft-spoken, and deeply committed to her education and faith. Friends described her as the type of person who would help others, share notes, and always carry a Bible with her. At the time of her death, Uwa was 22 years old and a student of microbiology at the University of Benin, Edo State, Nigeria. She had passed the years of coursework and was riding into her education with hopes of contributing to science, health, or research. In Benin City, many students lacked access to reliable, quiet study environments. Libraries were often overcrowded, sometimes closed early, or lacked sufficient materials. Churches, even during non-service hours, were perceived as sanctuaries of quiet, cooler interiors, open spaces, rarely disturbed. It was in one such church, affiliated with a local parish, that Uwa often went to study, especially in the afternoons and early evenings. Her mother and siblings spoke of her discipline. Uwa often left early in the day, carrying books and snacks, and might remain in that church until nightfall. As the day wore on, phone calls might be unanswered, especially if her device was turned off or battery drained. Those who knew her remember her smiles, her faith, and her seriousness toward her goals. She was not merely going through school, she was training her mind, hoping to build a life of purpose. And on that fateful day, she believed the church would shelter her ambitions. The date was in June 2020. Nigeria was in the grip of the COVID-19 era, with many cities under restrictions, but life for many students continued, albeit changed. On that day, Uwa entered the church premises sometime in the morning or early afternoon. Her exact time of entry is uncertain, as no public log or eyewitness testimony pinned it down definitively. Throughout the day, she was presumed studying. Her campus or home contacts attempted to reach her by phone, but calls went unanswered. Her phone was said to be unreachable. At some point, a security guard on the premises entered the building and found a horrifying sight: Uwa lying unconscious in a pool of blood. She was rushed to a nearby hospital, fighting for life, but the injuries proved too severe. After days of critical treatment, she succumbed to her injuries. Some sources report she died on Saturday, a few days after the initial attack. Let us reconstruct the moments from what public reports, media coverage, and interviews have revealed, not as certainties, but as the most plausible sequence given available evidence. Morning to early afternoon, Uwa arrives, settles in, reads, studies. Mid-afternoon, contacts attempt to reach her, unanswered calls. Evening, a church worker or assistant pastor's wife opens the doors, goes into the sanctuary or study room, and discovers Uwa in critical condition. Immediate aftermath, police and family are contacted, she is transported to hospital. Later days, despite medical attention, she dies from her injuries. Critically, initial reports indicated that evidence at the scene was not handled with professional care. There were allegations that the crime scene was left for hours or even days without proper cordoning, without gloves, and without securing or collecting all materials of interest. Rumors circulated that some materials were contaminated or lost. This failure to preserve the integrity of evidence at the outset would haunt the investigation from the start. Meanwhile, the fact that this cruel act was committed inside a church, a place many would deem safe, added a painful contrast. It forced Nigerians to ask, if even sanctuaries are no longer safe, where can a person find refuge? As soon as news spread, a wave of anger, grief, and demands for accountability swept across Nigeria and beyond. Social media became a battleground of voices, amplifying pain and demanding justice. The hashtag Justice for Uwa trended widely. Students, women's groups, activists, clergy, and ordinary citizens took to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and other platforms. They posted images of candles, portraits of Uwa, quotes from the Bible, and voices demanding investigation. On campuses, students organized vigils, protests, and remembrance services. In Benin City and Edo State, groups marched to police stations and government buildings, singing, chanting her name, and carrying placards reading, "No more silence, we want justice, stop violence against women." Prominent voices joined. The University of Benin, through its authorities, expressed shock, pledged cooperation, and called for swift arrest of perpetrators. Clergy across Nigeria, including high-ranking pastors, offered prayers, public statements, and moral urgency. Some religious leaders described the attack, especially inside a church, as sacrilegious and unacceptable. Non-governmental organizations and human rights groups weighed in. Amnesty International Nigeria, as well as feminist and gender-based violence advocacy groups, used Uwa's case as a clarion call. They pointed to the pattern: one more instance of sexualized violence against women, poor investigation response, and systemic apathy. Her killers must not go scot-free, some statements declared. If this case fails, what message do we send to other women in Nigeria which is already unsafe? As the public pressure mounted, authorities could no longer ignore the case. But would their response match the outrage? That question would define much of the investigation that followed. Under enormous public pressure, law enforcement agencies pledged full investigation. But as so often in such cases, promises collided with institutional constraints, conflicting reports, and murky developments. Let us examine what is publicly known about arrests, suspects, confessions, or the lack thereof, and the challenges the investigators faced. Initial actions and challenges. Within days of the public outcry, the police claimed they had launched a probe, assigned detectives, and would comb forensic evidence. Yet, critics were quick to point out glaring issues: the crime scene had already been compromised, potential evidence remained uncollected or unprotected, and chain of custody procedures were reportedly ignored. Some sources claimed that suspects had been arrested. A suspect reportedly confessed to involvement. There were claims in media and social circles that a gang was paid 1 million Nigerian nairas, 1 million naira, to carry out the crime. But these were not always corroborated by official documents. Others claimed that multiple people were involved, and that the crime had more than one actor, an orchestrator, possibly, and foot soldiers. But public records have not consistently matched these claims. Between press statements, leaks, and rumor, confusion reigned. Some names circulated online, but no clear, authoritative list of all suspects has been verified in the public domain. Confession, retraction, or ambiguity. In situations like these, confessions may emerge, but their legal validity, voluntariness, and consistency matter. Some reports said that the suspect admitted involvement, but others countered that the confession was coerced or incomplete. We lack full access to court documents or verified transcripts. It is unclear whether all arrestees remain in custody, whether charges have been formally filed in court, or whether trials have commenced publicly. Challenges facing prosecution. Several structural obstacles worked against a clean, transparent conviction. 1. Forensic and forensic capacity limits. Nigeria's forensic infrastructure is underfunded. The capacity to analyze DNA, fibers, trace evidence, blood spatter, and other critical materials is limited. In cases where crime scenes are mishandled from the start, forensic clarity becomes even harder. 2. Delayed or ruined evidence. When a crime scene is left open, evidence degrades, physical items may be contaminated, destroyed, or removed. Witnesses might forget or be intimidated. With no reliable chain of custody, defense could argue evidence is invalid. 3. Institutional interference and corruption. Critics alleged that political actors, local elites, or church hierarchy might have influence. Whether this is substantiated remains uncertain. Still, in many Nigerian cases, allegations of interference or undue influence are common. 4. Lack of transparency and public updates. Over time, media coverage of arrests waned. Few credible updates have been given to the public about trial progress, evidence releases, or judgments. 5. Legal procedural delays. Even when charges are filed, cases can drag for years, repeated adjournments, appeals, missing files, or absentee parties. Given these obstacles, it is difficult to know whether justice will be delivered, or whether the case will stall in limbo. Before moving on, let us pause to reflect on how the law, society, and institutions interact, and sometimes fail, in cases like this. Uwa's death did not happen in isolation. It intersected with culture, gender, power, and fear. To place Uwa's case in context, we must examine how Nigeria's legal and institutional systems treat sexual violence, murder, evidence, and victims' rights. Low conviction rates and backlog. Across Nigeria, many rape, sexual assault, and femicide cases never lead to convictions. Some are dropped quietly, others are never investigated at all. Many survivors never come forward, fearing stigma, reprisal, or institutional apathy. Take, for example, cases where police demand informal payments, or where complainants are discouraged from pursuing legal action. Prosecutors, facing underfunded courts or overloaded dockets, may deprioritize complex cases. Witnesses may be reluctant to testify, or may be bribed or intimidated. Victim and family pressure. Frequently, families are pressured, socially, financially, or by influential persons, to stay silent or settle outside court. Survivors often face shame or blaming, especially women in patriarchal environments. The fear of retaliation is real. Institutional barriers. Police officers responsible for crime scene processing may lack adequate training, equipment, gloves, evidence bags, forensic kits, or oversight. Sometimes, evidence is mishandled or lost, or protocols are not enforced. Court sometimes moves slowly, with long adjournments, lost documents, absentee defendants or lawyers, and appeals that stretch years. Accountability deficits. When high-profile cases like Uwa's shine a spotlight, authorities may act under pressure, but sustaining that momentum after media attention fades is a different matter. Some cases benefit from public scrutiny, many do not. Role of media and public pressure. Uwa's case shows that when citizens demand accountability, when voices rise, authorities may respond. But lasting change requires institutional reform, better forensic labs, police training, judicial independence, victim support mechanisms, safe houses, and legal aid. In short, Uwa's story spotlighted not just one crime, it revealed persistent systemic fragility. As we go forward, let us examine what has happened in the aftermath and whether any progress has been made, or whether her memory has been lost in time. In the weeks, months, and years following Uwa's death, her name became both a rallying cry and a memory. Activists and student groups held memorials, vigils, and remembrance gatherings. Candles, portraits, flowers, prayer sessions, these became symbols of resilience. On social media, #JusticeForUwa periodically resurged, especially when there were public statements or anniversaries. Churches, some local, others national, used her case as a call to protect congregants, especially women and girls, even in places deemed sacred. The contrast of a horrific attack inside a church struck many as sacrilegious, forcing religious institutions to reflect on security, accountability, and pastoral care. In certain quarters, calls were made for policy and legislative reforms, better forensic systems, gender-sensitive policing, protection and legal support for survivors, improved accountability mechanisms, and public awareness campaigns to reduce violence against women. However, publicly verifiable reforms directly attributed to her case remain opaque. There is no nationwide statute that can be traced solely to Uwa's tragedy, though she is often cited in ongoing debates about campus safety, sexual violence, and institutional reform in Nigeria. From time to time, media outlets run retrospective pieces. Where are they now? Has justice been done? Why is Uwa still waiting? These stories keep her name alive, and remind the public that unresolved cases fester in collective memory. Similarly, legal scholars, women's rights advocates, and journalists use Uwa's case in academic or policy discussions. She becomes more than a victim, she becomes a symbol, a caution, and a demand, that such tragedies must not be forgotten, and must lead to systemic change. As we approach the final sections, we turn toward unresolved questions, reflection, and the legacy she leaves behind. Even now, years later, many questions remain unanswered. Who masterminded the attack? Were there hidden beneficiaries, individuals who ordered or funded it? Was this a random act of violence, or a planned, commissioned crime? Public records do not confirm a clear orchestrator. Were all perpetrators identified? If multiple people were involved, were they all arrested? Were they all charged or prosecuted? Some names surfaced, but no fully credible, publicly confirmed list of all involved persons has been released. What evidence remains unexamined? If evidence was lost, destroyed, or mishandled, forensic clarity may never be achieved. Are there hidden pieces, DNA, fingerprints, surveillance, communications data, that remain locked away or undisclosed. Has justice been served? In Nigeria, justice is more than prosecution, it includes transparency, accountability, and closure for victims' families. To many observers, justice in Uwa's case remains pending. Why have public updates been scarce? One of the tragedies of high-profile cases is that media attention fades. Once the spotlight dims, authorities often deliver fewer updates. Lack of transparency fosters suspicion and distrust. What does Uwa's case tell us about broader patterns? This is not an isolated incident. Cases across Nigeria and Africa reflect similar stories: violence against women in safe spaces, poor investigation, institutional apathy, victim blaming, and impunity. Uwa's name helps us track patterns and demand accountability. Let us now reflect on the meaning and legacy of Uwa's story, and consider how we can collectively honor her memory by pushing for change. Uwa Omozuwa's murder is more than a tragic story, it is a mirror held up to society. Here are some reflections. Sanctuary violated, she went into a church to study. She expected peace. Her attack inside that sanctuary is a powerful symbol. Even places of faith and refuge can be infiltrated by violence, reminding us that trust cannot be blind. Gender and vulnerability, her case speaks to the daily risks faced by women and girls, on campuses, public spaces, houses of worship, even in environments meant to be safe. Power of public voice, the protests, the hashtags, the collective outrage prove that when citizens demand justice, institutions can be forced to respond. But public pressure must be sustained, not fleeting. Institutional weakness and reform, without structural changes, better forensics, accountable policing, independent judiciary, victim support systems, cases like Uwa's risk being lost in bureaucracy. Memory as duty, her name must not fade. Every time we mention justice for Uwa, we reclaim the narrative. We remind authorities, society, and ourselves that her life mattered, and that her case still calls for resolution. When greatness is born in small lives, we owe it to them to keep their stories alive. In closing, the death of Uwa Omozuwa was a crime, but the silence and inaction that follow such crimes can be an even deeper wound. May we refuse silence. May we demand accountability. May Uwa's legacy be more than grief, may it be a turning point. If you have watched to this video, I invite you, share this story. Let others know. Use your voice. Comment below, what steps do you think should be taken next? What do you think justice for Uwa looks like? If you found this story meaningful, subscribe, hit like, and share. Let her name echo far beyond tragedy. Thank you for watching. May peace, truth, and justice find their way.